Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Frontline IAM Best Practices for Critical Assets and Infrastructure. I'm Andrew, Identity Security Product Specialist at Axiad. And today, we'll be talking about something that's become the #1 cybersecurity priority, protecting identities and credentials in critical infrastructure. So if you work in energy, finance, transportation, healthcare, manufacturing, you already know securing systems is more difficult than ever. Cyber criminals don't need to hack in anymore, they just log in. A single stolen password or weak authentication policy can bring down entire supply chains, disrupt essential services, and can cause financial disaster. We've all seen the headlines from ransomware attacks on hospitals to cyber attacks. Shutting down pipelines, identity-based threats are really the front line of modern cybersecurity. That's why today we're going to break it all down. But before we get into the details, let's take a quick look at today's agenda. We'll be starting by answering a very simple but critical question. Why is identity security the first line of defense for critical infrastructure? We'll look at the shift from traditional cyber attacks to identity-based breaches and what that means for security teams. Then we'll dive into real-world threats, including how attackers took down the Colonial pipeline and why ransomware groups rely on stolen credentials rather than technical exploits. Then we'll talk about challenges, the most common IAM struggles that organizations face. If you've ever struggled or been frustrated with too many IAM tools, compliance headaches, or really any out-of-control third-party access, this section's for you. Then we'll discuss solutions, specifically how a unified ICAM strategy can make security simpler, more effective, and easier to manage at scale. And then we'll share success stories. Real organizations like GE, the USDA, that have reduced credential theft, improved compliance, and cut security risks by centralizing ICAM. Finally, we'll go over next steps so you can leave with a clear game plan. So before we begin, what is critical infrastructure? For those who don't know what critical infrastructure is, some examples are public administration, energy, oil and gas, utility. In fact, CISA defines critical infrastructure as 16 different sectors, with each having their own regulations and attack vectors. But what we do know is that cyber threats, generally, they're targeting critical infrastructure, and it's becoming more severe than ever. The difference now is that attackers have realized that they don't need to break in when they can simply log into systems. In other words, they're targeting identities and credentials. In fact, here's what the data shows us. 90% of breaches start with identity compromise. 24% of breaches involve stolen credentials, making them the #1 attack method. And 60% of cyber attacks target third-party suppliers or vendors. So a real-world example is the Colonial pipeline attack, one of the most damaging cyber attacks on US critical infrastructure. In 2021, hackers gained access to a critical system using a single stolen password. The attack led to fuel shortages across the East Coast, panic buying, and millions in financial losses. It wasn't a really highly sophisticated attack. It was just a failure of identity security. Another example, ransomware groups like Lockbit, Black Cat, they've been specifically targeting critical infrastructure, such as hospitals, power grids, water facilities, by stealing employee login credentials. Once inside, they can encrypt data, demand ransom, and disrupt operations for days, weeks, even months. But what the bottom line for us means is that identity security must be a priority. But what are the biggest challenges to improving identity security? Many organizations want to improve IAM security, but major roadblocks really often stand in the way. One of the biggest challenges is fragmentation. Too many tools, across too many environments. Many companies really use a patchwork of identity management tools across IT, OT, cloud environments. Without a unified approach, securing access is really inconsistent. It forms gaps between the systems and makes it easier for attackers to move laterally. Compliance is another big example of a challenge. Organizations must align with strict mandates from CISA, FedRAMP, NIST, TSA, but a lot of security teams struggle to implement those IAM solutions that are both compliant and operationally efficient. And another common challenge is managing third-party access. Vendors, contractors, supply chain partners, they often require privileged access to critical systems. But if this access isn't really tightly controlled, it creates a massive security risk. So there's a lot of different challenges, but what the challenges mean is that the organizations need a really modern, integrated IAM approach that eliminates complexity and enhances security.
To watch the full video, click the link below to our Bright Talk channel. For more Axiad content, click subscribe.